Laura, thanks so much for joining me remotely today.
Absolutely. That's today's mission, isn't it? Remote, remote, remote.
Exactly. Well, and we discussed beforehand. We've both had our second shot, but it takes a couple weeks for the
Yes.
for the immunity to kick in. So better to be safe than sorry. But it's nice to have a light at the end of the tunnel for sure.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That's what we keep saying. So absolutely.
Great. So can you tell the listeners what Ventureprise is?
Sure. Actually, Ventureprise is UNC Charlotte's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center. And we actually work with both community and university faculty, staff, and students. We have a couple of different programs. At our core, we're a National Science Foundation I-Core site. And what that is we were funded by the National Science Foundation. We were actually one of the original 36 back in 2015. But basically, Congress went to National Science Foundation and said, hey, we're giving you a lot of funding. Where is that money going? How are these projects turning out? And National Science Foundation said, hey, we're going to actually develop a program called Innovation Core or I-Core. And what that does is we work with faculty, students, staff on commercializing research and ideas on campus. And it's getting those professors and those students outside of the lab, off of campus, and into the industries, and really diving into what problem they're solving, how the industry can be affected by what they're doing. And it's really understanding how they can pivot or actually fit their research into that. So we had been doing that for a few years, and NC IDEA came along and said, this is great foundational programming, and we see this missing in a lot of our grant applications. So it'd be great if you could become a ecosystem partner and actually offer this programming to community teams as well. So that's what we do. So it's called Ventureprise Launch. It's at its core, it's a 6-week customer discovery program, but we offer it for university and for community teams. And that's been going along. I think we're over 300 teams combined through both programs.
Wow.
And then we also work with students. We have the 49er Foundry. That's where students come in with their ideas, whether it's business or social change that they want to make an impact in. We work with them. We have the Charlotte Venture Challenge. We actually had that last week. But that's a big showcase on all of our Ventureprise participants. So we have a big showcase, and we do panels and presentations on work that everybody's been doing on campus and in the community. It sort of brings everybody together. And so we sort of really highlight what's going on across Charlotte on campus and through the community.
That's really cool. How long have you been involved with Ventureprise?
So I actually went through Ventureprise in its infancy with my company back in 2015, and we were one of the inaugural teams that went through it because we actually had spun out of some university research. I worked with 2 engineers, and we went through that in 2015. Had always kept in touch with Paul Wettenhall and Devin Collins, who ran the program, and about 2000 into 2017, we were making some pivots and we're going to hand off our project. And this position opened at Ventureprise, and I was actually a UNC Charlotte alum. I'd gotten my master's there and had went through the programming, had started a company, so sort of fit into the position. And so I've been there since the end of 2017.
That's great. So you've been working there for 4 years officially, but
Yes.
you've been exposed to it since for 6 years. It sounds like.
Yes.
How would you categorize the interest in Ventureprise? I'm trying to get at are students really interested in entrepreneurship? Is it increasing? Is it staying the same? How would you categorize how things have changed over those 6 years?
So I'll see that there's a difference in student interest in terms of what they're looking at. So at UNC Charlotte, there is not a major or a minor. There's a lot of classes offered. There's some classes offered across campus in the Belk College of Business and some other classes, but there's not a major or minor. So nobody is coming and specifically saying, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. You're always going to get students who have it in their family. Their parents were an entrepreneur, their uncle, aunt, or somebody that they know. So they come with that drive and they have these ideas and they'll come and visit us. But I've done a lot of research over the last couple of years. And what I've done is really tried to go out and do table events at the student center, in front of some other buildings, and just sort of ask students what they think entrepreneurship is. And what I've realized is they feel it's this really loaded word. It's you have to have all this money, you have to have everything figured out, you have to have a team put together, you have to be very technical, you have to be able to design, so it's all of these components, and it's just like, no, no, no. My next question is always, do you have something that, you have a problem in your community, in your dorm, in your area that you'd like to, make an impact on or change? And they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, well, what are your thoughts on that? And they're talking entrepreneur, they have that entrepreneurial mindset. And so I started approaching, instead of saying that we're entrepreneurship, I say making an impact, making a change. And that really seems to resonate with a lot more students, especially through COVID and through everything that happened last summer, and the Black Lives Movement, and all of this really, really sparked this change, and where students really wanted to get involved with social activism. And so we actually just had a competition last month, and it was called 49er Impact. And we allowed students two different paths. They could either choose the business path, which is where they already had some sort of an idea and it was going to pivot into a business, or it was called Chance for Change, if you wanted to get involved in social change somehow. And what was your idea? And so we actually had the biggest turnout that we've had remotely, especially. So we had about 25 kids, 25 students get involved, and they were about even in each of the tracks. And what we did is we held the first workshop. So we had a workshop for each, and I had a panel for each of those, and everybody had UNC Charlotte ties or Ventureprise ties. So it was all of these people that had been out in the community and doing things. They wanted to be a part of this panel, so they came on. We asked questions about how they started their business or how they started their nonprofit, and sort of went through a panel. There was a Q&A session, but then what we did is we had breakout rooms. So each of the panelists got a team or two to sort of work one-on-one and work closely with their ideas and help them develop it. Then the students had about a week to go and actually record in a 3-minute pitch video. And we had 19 submissions, took it down to 10, and then the final 10 competed for the final prize, which was a summer accelerator that we're doing coming up next month. So we're going to work with them on actually launching their idea, but each team got $1,500. So we
Wow.
picked 6 teams. We picked 3 from each category. So this summer, we're going to work on helping these kids really get to the next level, do some more customer discovery, and dive into how they can actually develop it. And it ranges from ideas of, we have Resume Plus, which is, how to really be able to get in and do a resume quickly and upload it for all these different types of jobs. And then we have a recycling platform where an engineering student is very interested in the plastic that can't be recycled. Well, he can actually take that material down and build birdhouses and benches from this material. So he's making a platform where people can, say, hey, here's a pickup of, so many plastic items. And then people can put in orders for different types of projects.
I wish they'd do it for my Amazon boxes.
Okay, see, so it's just, but he had never talked about his idea before. He actually just heard about what we were doing, came to the panel, and when we were in the breakout room with him, he's just like, yeah, this is what I do. I build these birdhouses, but there's just all this plastic and you can't recycle it. It's, the plastic bottles and all of this, and it just sits in landfills. But I can actually grind it down. And so there was another panelist and I were in this room, and we were like, well, have you thought about, where you could pick up? And he said, yeah, there's at UNC Charlotte, there's all these big storage places where they're just sitting right now. And it could save them money if I would just pick it up and grind it. And so we said, well, why don't you look at all those different places? And he started going, oh yeah. And we said, there's all these different people that would be very interested in buying, and supporting this, but you could, put things up and they could buy them. And so he's in his infancy stages of it, but he had never talked about it. So I thought that was one of the amazing things about it this past semester is I think 70% of the students had never talked about an idea out loud before in front of anybody. So getting them to actually just talk about it, think it through. We had them do a little customer discovery and talk to 2 or 3 people just about their idea and what the industry was like, and formulate a 3-minute pitch. And I was amazed. Like, I'm so proud of each of those students, but I'm seeing that growth. I'm seeing them understand that it's not just there's this great things in tech and and really innovative in engineering. There's that side. Then there's also putting together a thought and having the foundation to actually start a program, start a nonprofit, or whatever you'd like to do down that path. So there's all these different options that include entrepreneurial thinking. And I think that that's really important for students to realize, because it's almost a professional development quality too. I've had, different people call me that, where we have a student applying for a job and they've gone through our program. And what is this I-Core program? What did they have to do? They said they learned some skills through there. And I was like, well, they're actually looking for people to interview. They're interviewing them. They're formulating presentations every week to talk about what they've learned. And, these corporations are saying, wait, hold on. You mean this student just cold called, 10 different people and
Yeah.
asked for interviews and formulated interview questions. And I'm like, yeah, and and it just made them better interviewees as well. So even, that's why I tell students, you do not have to start a business right after you finish this, and right after you go through this course, or even if you come and talk to me. We're not saying you start a business right here and now, because let's face it, it's the startup world. Most times it doesn't really get too far, in those initial stages. But it's the fact that you're trying and you're looking at all these alternative solutions and you're thinking outside the box. And customer discovery and doing this entrepreneurial thinking just really gives you a whole nother side of creativity and embracing a lot of different skills from a lot of different people.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Whether you start a business going through this process or not, you're going to be, it's skills that are in demand for anything that you're going to do. And even whether it's a corporation or a not for profit, I think it's great that you guys are just getting people to create and articulate ideas and think through the process. I think that's very, very valuable for anybody.
When I just talked to, so I've had a student go through a process and get a pretty big award on something, and it was told, I'm not. This one person that was on the panel was like, I'm one of the ones that wasn't 100% sold on the idea, but I am 1,000% sold on this person. And I know that they're going to go far. So I will invest. And that's what I tell, you have to be able to embrace pivots and listen. But it's really, when you're pitching and when you're doing all of this, you're selling yourself. It's really, can this person get this done? And I think it's really building that confidence and really understanding that you just give it a chance. And you expose yourself to a bit, but you're getting feedback, but learn. And that was one of the things on both of the panels for both tracks of the 49er Impact. I made sure to ask the panelists and the judges, okay, these students are going to be getting feedback. Some of them are not going to advance, but what do you want every student to take away from this? And made sure that that was very clear to all 25 students that were, sitting in on this, that they understood that this was something unique that a lot of people don't do. A lot of people don't take this leap and actually talk about their idea and try to do something about it and try to be proactive. So instead of going, oh, I didn't win, or oh, I didn't advance, so I failed. No, 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 no. Like, you are above so many other people because you took this leap.
That's awesome. Well, I want to come back to Ventureprise. Just it's fascinating to me, and you guys are doing such great work there. But first, can you walk me through your own entrepreneurial journey? You mentioned the startup that dragged you into
Yes.
into Ventureprise, so to speak. But you had a history before that of doing entrepreneurial things. So I'd love to hear how you got here.
It was very rare, I'll say. So, and I think basically I am if I fell into most of this, but I was from a very small town, Huntington, West Virginia, went to Marshall University, and I did not do an internship. Back in the mid 90s, it was not, that just wasn't something that was really, really focused on. Now that's all you hear is internships, but back in those days, you really didn't. And my department had actually sent me to England to go to school. I was one of this test studies to go do this program, and came back and needed to have certain amount of classes to graduate on time, to graduate. And they started talking about internships like toward the end. I was like, I don't have time. So I graduated and I did what most kids do at that age. I moved, but didn't move too far away. So I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and it's 2.5 hours away, and could not find a job. I was going everywhere, and everybody goes, so where did you intern? Where did you intern? I'd say, I backpacked through Europe. I went to school. And so ended up finding a job as a call center at a bank call center. And not for me. I was constantly told, keep it down, don't talk so long to the customers, all of that. But ended up going to school. There was a school right down the street from where the call center was. And it was Otterbein. And it's a small private college right outside of Columbus. And they did media, and I was really interested. And so I went and just talked to the director, and he said, well, we're doing radio this semester, but I don't want you to take a lot of classes. I just want to intern you out. I just want to see what you can do. So I took a few basic courses, but interned at a few places. But one of the ones was talk radio, and fell in love. Fell in love with news, fell in love with talk radio, fell in love with telling local stories and really understanding the needs of people, and news stories, really diving into them. So I ended up for 12 years being a talk show producer. Was very fortunate to have a program director and an executive director that very much believed in me, so kept promoting me. And ended up, my last 4 or 5 years was on the morning show. And that was juggling a lot. That was juggling probably about 16 guests a day, because they had like 3-minute segments, but it was, so I learned to really dive into research every day. Like, what are the stories that are coming up? What do people want to know about? What should we be covering? Who should we be talking to? So it was constant, research, making sure both sides of the story were told, and finding all these interesting. I didn't want to be just the person that had the same, gentleman on that had been on on another show. I was trying to find more local angles and things like that. So did that for 12 years. Absolutely loved it. Sort of came to an end. It started to change a little bit. The industry changed. And so I decided to bow out, while I was still in love with it. Because basically it was, my 20s and early 30s. So I was like, I'm going to, bow out, but I want to have a great memory of it. And so that was something that I still get calls today, where I'm still pretty close to a lot of people that were at the radio station, and all of them go, you did it right. Like, we burned ourselves out, and we left angry and all of that. So I was very happy with that change. But when I changed, I honestly was so embedded into radio, I couldn't see myself living in Columbus and not being a part of that station. So I actually packed up everything and moved to Charlotte. I had my mother was here, grandfather who was 95 at the time, cousins. So I had a nice family base here. So moved here with the sole purpose of getting my master's. So I got my master's. So took me 4 years to get my master's overall, because I was working full time. I sold wine, started a radio show at Performance Racing Network, which is Charlotte Speedway's radio station. So worked there, started a wine show with them. The host of that show offered me a job to run her customer discovery department. So did that, then ended up selling it. So did all this stuff while I was getting my master's, but
Is wine particularly popular in the NASCAR world? Or?
So it was actually a nice tie. So what happened was they were looking for a different type of show. They wanted to sort of branch out and see. And at that time, Jeff Gordon and a couple of other guys were really into, starting their own wine labels and doing these vineyards. And there's, of course, a racetrack in Sonoma. So there was this great tie. So
That's
it
awesome.
actually ended up being, I love Sonoma. I love the Sonoma races just because of that. It's a road course, but also it was a nice area. But yeah, so it was a really different tie. So I learned a lot about wine. Did a lot of research. Again, went back to my radio roots that I loved, and researching different things to talk about in the wine industry and things like that. So did that, and was also getting my master's in communication studies, focusing on organizational and health, and ended up doing my thesis on PTSD and reintegrating soldiers. And I did it ethnography style, which is where I actually spent 6 months almost every morning in this coffee shop in Mooresville, North Carolina. And they had this coffee shop where a lot of soldiers had come home, but they just found like this was a safe place. So it was sort of like a mini museum, and they just felt comfortable there. So they would have all these conversations. So I went and spent a bunch of time with them and interviewed them, and ended up wrote my thesis, and quit the wine job to finish my thesis, and then was standing in the communication studies office, and somebody was on the phone, and she was like, "Hey, there's a gentleman on the phone, and he's asking if anybody needs a job. He's looking for somebody to hire, and he would like somebody with experience." Well, I was known as the older student, and I was
I've been that for sure.
I was basically I was trying to get my master's before I turned 40. So I got my master's on May 14th, turned 40 the next month. So I did that. But was in the office signing my paperwork, had just been through 2 hours of defending my thesis. And for those that have gone through that process, you feel like you've been in a fight. Like you're so mentally and physically exhausted. And this, the admin support was like, "Hey, do you want me to give him your resume?" And I was like, "Yeah, fine, whatever." Not thinking much of it. I did need a job. I had no clue what I was going to do, but I just couldn't see past getting that thesis completed. And this gentleman ended up calling me saying, "Hey, let's talk." So I went to an interview. I think 2 days later, I was still in the midst of making my edits for my thesis, but I was like, "Okay, I'll just go." And was so blunt. I don't think I've ever been so blunt in an interview, but I was at that point, when you're mentally exhausted from a thesis. So I just said, "Here's what I have experience in. Here's what I can do. Here's what I can't do, but here's what I can try." And he was like, "Yeah, you're hired." What? Excuse me? He was like, "Yeah." So he is this amazing man, but he has a lot of projects going on. He's always tinkering, is what I would say. He's has this, engineering background, but loves to build things, loves innovation, and loves to see how things can get solved. So he had invested into a engineering group for the senior design project at UNC Charlotte. And he saw something, he had submitted a project saying, "I know that there's something with waves and drinking water. I don't know what it is, but I see there's a connection here." And so basically with senior design at UNC Charlotte, what you do is you you sign up for projects, so they sort of match you. So all these people like the army submits that, all these different corporations across Charlotte, and they submit these projects that they want students to work on. And he just happens to be, an innovator in town that was like, "Oh, I'm going to get into this mix." And you pick your job. So the first semester, you sort of just draw it out. You sort of do a lot of research on it, draw it out. And then the second semester, you actually build it. And so he had watched these 6 students research reverse osmosis, research all these different components about wave power, and then built this amazing, it almost looked like a boat, pontoon boat. But basically it rocked back and forth. It really turned wave energy into mechanical energy and ran a reverse osmosis. And it did it in its very infancy form, but he saw something. And then he actually saw two of those students really rise to the top and really lead the project. So he had asked these 2 students to stay on and work, over the summer and possibly into the fall. But he was like, "Let's just see what we can make of this, in our next steps." And what happened was he was like, "I know how to put this team together, but I have no clue on how to do marketing, how to do a website." So that's basically what I did. I sort of learned along the way on how to promote what these 2 students had done. And we continued to work, and we got thrown together. There was a couple of other projects that he had me working on as well, but he will tell it as he immediately saw this connection between Justin, Chris, and I. We worked really well together. They were younger; they had just graduated as seniors from UNC Charlotte's engineering department. But Justin and I ended up flying. I was actually going to the Sonoma race and for my other job, but the California Department of Water was holding, this meeting and was asking for presenters. And I just happened to say, "Hey, I'm going to be down there, or I'm going to be out there. Do you want me to possibly meet with some of these?" Because California was going to be a perfect place for a renewable source of water. And he was like, "Yeah, let's do this." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I spoke before I really thought this through, but okay." And it was going to be in Sacramento. So we ended up flying Justin out because it ended up being more of a technical presentation. So he flew an engineer out with me. And so, yeah, we started talking about what we were doing. In its infancy, this was the end of 2014. We learned we were doing customer discovery. because we found out what was wrong. You know, they gave us all this feedback on what we were building. And so then we come back, we ended up doing Ventureprise's I-Corps program and going out and doing all these interviews, but really understanding like what we were doing. And I fell in love with it, but I realized I don't know anything about really, like, I realized that a lot of the stuff that I had learned through my other two jobs was really helpful in entrepreneurship. And there was lots of things I could piece together, but I was still nervous in talking about all of this. So one of the first things I did was go to pitch breakfast and just happened to hear about that. And we ended up pitching, but we learned so much. And I realized this panel that was giving feedback to the founders that were pitching was amazing. I was like, this is what you're really looking at behind the scenes of what, you know, potential investors, potential partners are really looking for. And it's all these different, you know, personalities and all these different pieces of advice. And you would learn something. So I started going every month. And through that, we did CLT Jules. They actually had seen us pitch. That was an energy incubator. It was a little bit
Actually, I
different.
was one of the founders of
Okay.
CLT Jules.
Okay.
So
Yes.
I helped Curtis and Dan out with that because I was
Yes.
running a smart grid
Curtis.
startup at the time.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So Curtis was one of our first advisors and sort of went into this and started really realizing, oh, people want to help. People want to do this. And so started really trying to really research all of the resources and sort of putting that piece together and fell in love, like really fell in love with the networking portion, with the pulling all the resource together and seeing how everything works as one. And so then about
It's funny.
2000. Oh, go
It's
ahead.
funny, those two tie-ins. I was going to
Yes.
ask about CLT Jules because you guys seem like a really good fit for that.
Yes.
And pitch breakfast. I actually did the first pitch breakfast for back then. Vic Howie
Yes.
and Jim
Yes.
Van Fleet were running. But
Yep. No, we
I
give.
have a place in my heart for pitch breakfast as a
No,
result.
that is, we just celebrated 7th birthday, 7th year, and we always bring, Vic is still a part. We call him the godfather of pitch breakfast. But I think it was 2 years ago, we had Jim. We celebrated what he had started. So we really had Jim. And yeah, so it's amazing I mean, it totally transformed. And
Yeah.
I think the biggest part about pitch breakfast is honestly not, it's great for the founder who's pitching to get that feedback, but I'm very proud of what comes out of it in terms of what people can learn.
Mhm.
And our panelists do a really good job of saying, you know, here's what I look for as an investor. And here's the 8 things you need to hit in any type of pitch, you know, in some form. You don't have to go into detail, you know, so they're giving all these pieces of tidbits of advice that you can really piece together and go, okay, I at least have this solid, you know, this solid foundation. And that's just where it was really amazing. And then understanding the university tie. The university was so supportive of us because it had spun out of a senior design project. So that's where the Ventureprise tie-in comes in. And, you know, they were constantly introducing us, and we were looking at different grant possibilities with other research on campus. So there's this flow that I think, and I know we're probably going to talk about it later, but the university tie-in with research and all of that is such an important component, I think, to a lot of startups. But it's sort of, that's sort of the path. But about 2017 to, because we were ending Soros and I was starting with Ventureprise. But what happened there is we realized we had done a completely different iteration. We went from a small pontoon boat to literally a buoy, a 5-foot buoy. We had made we called it Soros 2.0 and really, understood what was needed in the market. But what was wave energy is where solar energy was probably about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. It's still in those, still in those stages where they're finding out so much. The ocean is one of the most unforgiving mediums possible. There's so many different things that come out of that. And one of the things that I'm extremely proud of through Soros is we were really well known in terms of we were bucking the trend because we were doing small scale. If you look at wave energy, there's all these massive projects out there, and they're not doing desalination as we were doing. They're producing energy, which is great in itself, and they're powering small villages and small cities. But what happens is something's inevitably going to go wrong because the sea is so unforgiving. giving. And when that breaks, it's sometimes very hard for them to continue with their project. They lose funding, or or because it takes $100,000 to fix a small bolt, or something of that nature. So we were making consistent progress because we were small scale, but we were showing how it could scale, and we were getting noticed across. We spoke at International Desalination Association. We were at competitions in Paris. We were in, so they were taking notice of not only our actual product, but what we had learned. And, but at the very, very, like when we were trying to figure out like our next steps, we ultimately realized that it was not commercial yet. There was no way to really, it was still going to stay research to an extent. And so we ended up handing it off. National Renewable Energy Labs has some of it. There's actually a couple of professors that have taken over some of the core concepts that we started, and they're actually in a wave competition now, and we're still involved in that. So there's still a love at it, but I can tell, and this is one of the biggest lessons that I like everyone to know. It is amazing the support that we had when we told people we were turning it over. We probably had more congratulations and good for you in deciding in making that one of the most difficult decisions of our lives, deciding to hand that over. We got more congratulations that than making it to Paris in a final renewable energy competition, because people were just like, that's what entrepreneurship is, realizing when to say when, and realizing, what, I want to still support this in some way, but we're not the 3-man team to do it. We had lots of partners and had made such progress, but it needed to be in a lab with several people and consistent focus on the research portion. And we were trying to do the research and the commercialization, and it just wasn't that point yet. And understanding that is a heartbreak, but it was one of the most freeing and exciting parts of our lives too, because actually one of the engineers is with the National Renewable Energy Lab, and so he's out west doing work on that, and is basically recognized as a really important person in wave technology. And the other one is still doing engineering for another company. So we all sort of took different paths, but we still come together to talk about Saros. We still come together and support renewable energy and all this innovation. And it's funny because the students that come to me with renewable energy or energy ideas, when I actually can talk about it, they're like, wait, what? Hold on, where did that come from? But yeah, so there's a very long story of my path, but it's a very I guess staircasey and windy, but that's where I came from.
It usually works that way. And with renewables in particular, I mean, timing is huge. I have a very good friend who, while he was a PhD student at Florida State University, built the first completely off-grid home in America, and had a lot of patents and technology around solar thermal, not solar PV, which ended up being the winning technology. And he spent a lot of time and a lot of good engineering, and ultimately it was just it was a timing thing. If the industry isn't ready,
Nope. And depending on what else is out there and who else is, because I can remember Justin, one of our engineers, went to a conference in Oregon, and it was a wave energy, and all this money had been spent, and there was literally Saros was the only one that was still going. Like, because all of these, it's so much money to do this research and to get into the non-dilutive, those grants. It's a hard road to get there, but once you get there, it's really easily to stay into that leverage. But to get there is very hard, and a lot of people give up before that. And but if you stick with it, that's where it is, because they have to fund that research portion, and then you can do the other side with the commercialization. And I think that's where I've sort of seen that's where the winning trend is. You either have this path of all these different grants where you have a really nice runway for research and to flush it out, or you have two pipelines. You have a pipeline you're selling something already, that's sort of a component, but then you're also keeping this other pipeline open where you're doing research on, that's going to be your next scale, that's going to be how you're scaling in the future, but you're still working on it and get it funded through grants. So I think there's a balance to figure that out, and patience is something a lot of people don't have. to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And investors in particular aren't always the most patient.
Mhm.
If you can't get the grant money, you've got to be able to turn it into something commercial relatively
Yes.
quickly.
Yes.
So that's fascinating. I love hearing the background and kind of bouncing around and the flexibility and finding opportunities and things. That I think that's a real common story that I hear with entrepreneurial people for sure. Can you speak to the interesting connections that Ventureprise companies make with one another? The pitch breakfast that I pitched at, I had a company. It was a company called Reward Summit that I started, and I was in I think the second or third RevTech Labs
Mhm.
cohort at Packard Place, and there's just some weird connections that I made that are still paying dividends to this day. I call it quantum entanglement almost, because it's
Yeah.
just there's just certain people that I met and connected
Mhm.
with, and through the years have found different ways to collaborate. Can you speak to your experience with that at Ventureprise?
Sure. I actually have two stories that I always tell when somebody asks something about this, and I love these two stories. So one of them is Katie Hotes, who has grocery shopping, and she came in, and her idea was a little bit different when she came in about 2 years ago. But her class, that cohort, was extremely close. They bonded almost instantly. I had realized off on the side they had all put done a LinkedIn group together, and I just saw something really magical happening between, I think there was about 9 teams, so there's probably about 11 or 12 people in this group. And they just were really supportive. And part of Ventureprise launch and part of our programming, the great part is meeting these other people that are in the same stage as you. And you have a lot of people don't know about a lot about the ecosystem yet, so they're meeting a lot of people for the first time and going, oh, okay, like you have doubts, and oh, okay. But then it's also a lot of feedback. There's a lot of opportunities. They're always helping each other refer, with their idea on, okay, for this person's customer discovery, they have to interview this type of people. Oh, I have 3 names that I could give you. Oh, I'm in this industry, I can introduce you to 2 different people. So I've always seen that magic happen. And when people walk away, we always, do feedback and what could we do to improve the program? What did you like? One of the top, comments is always, I love the group. I loved meeting other people, have and getting feedback from from people that were in the same stage. I love the camaraderie. But this group was a little bit different. So it turns out that one of the other guys that was in the program, he ended up realizing after customer discovery, I think I'm going to put this on hold. It's not really, as on fire as I thought it was at this point. There's a lot of other stuff to do. But Katie, I really like yours. I could help you. You're looking for some tech, right? Like I could do. So they're now a force and partners and working at grocery shop, and so it's this amazing team that had came out of literally just being in a program from Ventureprise and sort of going through those initial stages together and finding out what one person does and what the other person does and going, hey, we could make a really great team at doing this together.
It's
And
textbook networking, right? I mean, that's
yes.
yeah.
And it's not forced. Like that's sort of the thing. Like we don't say, okay, everybody talk, it's sort of where we let that stuff happen. And I think organically, if you make the opportunities, then I think that's something that's worthwhile, definitely. And then sort of what happens organically is my second story. So every quarter, Ventureprise pre-COVID likes to do we do a quarterly networking event, and we try to do a theme. Whether it's, hey, there's an NC Idea grant cycle coming up, and we have somebody from NC Idea come down and do a presentation and do one-on-ones, on feedback on their, what they could do for their application. Or we do, one we did was they had to write down what they were in need of. Were they in need of a developer? Were they in need of some social media help or whatever? And you sort of start cross talking and all of that. Well, at one of ours, there was somebody that had just went through our on the community side, Abby Oluki, who's with Smart Girls HQ. And she had already had this really great base of a product, and had done customer discovery. And it's basically doing, these activity kits because she wants to encourage younger females to stay in the STEM field because there's this research that shows at a certain age females tend to shy away from the STEM fields, and she's trying to make sure that that's balanced out with encouragement. And so she got to get, so basically her thought process was, what do parents need to encourage this? And she found that adults were a lot of parents were very encouraged and one, yes, I want to do this, but I have no clue. I'm not good in math. I'm not good in science, so I need help. So she saw where it was more helping the parents help their children.
Yep.
But so she had this commercial side where she was sending, it was really cool. It's something where it's a project that you do, but then it also relates to a career in the STEM field. So she started working on all of this. She was talking to one of the PhD students on campus at the event and said, there's just something missing. Like, I really see this growing. I don't, I'm really trying to scale this. And so he said, you should talk to my professor. She's doing some AI work in recommender systems. And she was like, oh, okay. So they had this conversation. They went through National I-Corps together. They've combined, and now they just received phase 1 SBIR grant for $256,000.
Wow.
So they really found this mutual. So Dr. Mayer from UNC Charlotte was really interested in what Abby was doing, because she is one of those professors that loves to see her work be put in real world situations. She is one of those professors that gets so excited and supports it. And she's one of Ventureprise's biggest supporters in terms of bringing students through. So both realizing what they could do. So that's sort of where that dual role is that I was talking about. So Abby has this, has this packaging and has this physical product that she sends, but then is also working on this entirely different component of her business where it's going to scale, because she's going to have this recommender system implemented into her site. So those are two stories that, like, I feel really represent what the goal is and what gets me really excited about partnerships and meeting and networking and where university meets community.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the founder of Stratified, real successful machine learning company here in Charlotte that's raised a whole bunch of money. And he tells the story about when he was a professor at UNC Charlotte, and he was focused on data science there, and he applied for a grant, and he had developed, ironically enough, he had developed an algorithm, or had trained an algorithm for identifying pandemic outbreaks in social media, and he got a CDC grant. And this was probably 7-8 years ago. And I think Kathy Besant from Bank of America sat on the advisory board that was advising this research, and she told him, like, you need to commercialize this for the banks, because this could be real. And so here they developed this technology for pandemics, but then you have a high powered banking executive. And I feel like only the universities can really fit that role of kind of convening and bringing together the big corporate. I mean, I shouldn't say only, but the universities certainly have a big role. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
And I think that's where it almost makes sense, where it doesn't seem forced and you're not under this pressure. It's sort of like you're exposing the professors and the students to these opportunities. And it's not like, oh, because you know how nervous everybody gets to present and to do this. But if you're in these different situations and you're showing your work and you're doing different things, the real you sort of shows. And it's like, wait, I keep hearing about this and I keep seeing this. And then I think also the university is able to bring together a group of people that see beyond maybe what is exactly being presented. Hey, wait, I can see how this can be transformed into this. And I think that that's where those opportunities really come through, because we coach this all the time. And my engineers used to despise me, but I was like, quit with if you talk about PSIs one more time, like, I'm falling asleep,
Yeah.
and they hated the way that I said, ocean water goes in one side, clean water comes out the other. Very simplified, but people would lean in and go, oh, wait, how do you do that? And I'd say, oh, ask them. But at least, but if you started talking about PSIs and, the nuts and bolts, that people would be like, oh, that's cool, and then walk away.
Yeah.
So I think there's this also, and I'm sort of the benchmark for that with our professors and faculty and students, everybody, because I'm like, yeah, I didn't really understand what you're talking about. let's try this again. Let's go one more time. And you can get into the other types of explanations, but reel me in with a problem that you can solve.
Well, yeah, I talk about it. It's, and one of my professors drilled this, a marketing professor in my graduate program, drilled it into my head, which is people don't buy features, they buy benefits. Like he would say, you're not buying a drill. Like
Yep.
you're,
Yep.
you're buying a memory that you're hanging on the wall. That's what you're buying. And the minute we have something that I don't have to, put a screw into a wall, you're not going to want anymore. You're not buying a lawnmower. You want 3-inch tall grass so that your neighbors don't get mad at you.
Yeah.
The
No,
minute
no, that's
somebody
it.
makes a seed that can grow 3 inches and stop, the lawn mowing industry is done.
Yes, and that's what people don't see, and I think that's the hardest part of my job is because I always say customer discovery is not the sexy part. It's not building the website, it's not tinkering with your technology, it's not doing, any of that. But I try to explain once you have the problem you're solving and the value that it brings to your potential customers, then you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But until you have that foundation and that laid out, like I understand that it excites you to build. I really do. And I understand that you want to have something tangible in a website and things like that. But what are you going to say on that website? What are you going to say to make people stop? What are you going to say on your social media feed that makes people go, "Oh yeah, that's what we're helping you find out." And it's hard as heck not talking about what you're doing to people. When you're interviewing and you're doing these customer discovery interviews, time and time again, we'll have people come in and report weekly and go, "Oh, this week I talked to 7 people. All of them loved what I'm doing." Whoa, why do people know what you're doing? And it's like, "Well, I ended up, telling them that." No, 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 no. Like, because I did this. I was the world's worst. And Devin, my colleague and boss, will tell you that we walked in so confident we were doing customer discovery. We're like, we're making water. Hello. Well, and we're doing it in an environmentally friendly way. Come on. And it was a reality check. It was a complete reality check because we would go in. So we started, we were like, who's your market? The world. Okay. And Devin says that he remembers going, let me know about that. And
Yeah.
I remember we really thought that it was going to be first responders and first aid and Red Cross and all of these types of responders and hurricanes and all that. And we talked to a bunch of them and they were just like, we can never take a chance on anything. Like, yes, bottled water is horrible for the environment and it's heavy and it's, it is, all of this, but it works and we know it works. So talk to us in 7 years when this is tried, true, and tested, and we know that it's not going to fail when we implement it into an area, a disaster disaster relief. So we were wiped out pretty quick on that one. We were like, oh, okay, they're not taking a chance on us. So, okay, they may be in the future. So you put them over. And then we started going to different, talking with people, representatives from different countries. And that's where I really realized my background came into this because I knew how to study other cultures, but I realized they didn't know that they had a problem. So we would talk to people where it was known that they were water impoverished. Like it was a statistic, they had no water. And so we would go in and talk to some of these and talk some of these people, and they would say, we don't have a problem. We get up, first thing, and we walk 6 miles to a stream. We collect our, there's 7 of us that collects the water. We come back. That's our ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have but we would say, but look, with ours, you could just go 6 feet. Like it's right there. And they would say, no, like we're not interested. And I realized that that's where you're really doing a lot of customer discovery and realizing it's a cultural, you can't tell people, you can't convince people that they have a problem. You can't, show them, look, this is wonderful.
Well, and this is where if you can come in with your head on a swivel and be ready to educate and listen to the customers. I remember in the smart grid company that I talked about where I got involved with CLT Jules.
Yeah.
We built a system that was worlds ahead of any other system out there in terms of the amount of data that it could pull in. We could pull data every 5 milliseconds if we wanted with the network that we built. And we would go show it to utility customers and they would say, I need to read a meter once a month to generate a bill. Why would I want more data? And they're not wrong. It's just
Right.
that they don't understand the art of the possible. And so what my the CEO of that business was brilliant about was that he just kept going through what are the things that I can show them with this extra data that they actually care about. And so we started figuring out, okay, they want demand response, they want meter reading, they want, and none of those, and not one of those would pay for the solution. But when we piece together enough solutions, but then I remember it was an education process because we deployed in McMinnville, Tennessee, and the director calls me after they'd been using it in production. He calls me up and he says, we just got some new regulations from the Tennessee Valley Authority where we buy power and we've got to clean up our power. And he's like, I remember you guys telling me that you could do like 5 millisecond incremental data. Would we be able to measure voltage spikes using it? And we're like, yes, that's it. This is the type of thing that you can't do without data, you know? And so it's a process. But again, I think you have to come in with, okay, I've built this thing and I know that it can do things, but what does my customer actually want to do? And you need to be patient because they're not going to figure out exactly the right use case. But if you can find one, you're in the game long enough, and then you find the killer application.
Yeah, and the low hanging fruit, like that's what we sort of teach. And when you're talking to these, potential customers, potential partners, what we really say is dive deep. It sounds like you're talking with a toddler, but you keep asking why.
Yeah.
And, so when they're talking about, what's a day like for you? Well, we have to do this every so often. Why do you have to do that? Oh, so you're doing this, but why wouldn't you do, and you're getting deeper and deeper. Then you start to realize that they hate doing something and you're like, okay, or they have to do this because they can't find it any other way. You start putting that in your head. And then that's where you have to be open to pivot a little bit and say, okay, we need to add this in there so they're able to do this because that's the answer that they're looking for. That's the pain point that we're going to solve for them. And once you get, that low hanging fruit in that initial customer, you're able to really, everybody wants data. When you go to when you're writing for either a grant or going for an angel funder, angel funding or seed, any of that, they want to say, okay, so you're doing this. What problem are you solving? How are you solving it? What have you done so far? And where's the data? And you need to show, okay, here's what we've done so far. It doesn't have to be this massive, but it shows that it works and you found a target and this is how you plan to scale. And this is what we need the money for. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that's amazing that you found that because that's the true essence of patience, customer discovery, and features versus value.
Yeah.
Because people, will say, what's your value proposition? We're faster. No.
Yeah.
Everybody says that. What problem are you solving by being faster?
Well, and the hard part is in that particular case, the founder, the guy that invented it all, he was a visionary. He just knew. He's like, I know that giving them more data will revolutionize their businesses. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's hard when you can see that vision and then people are like, I just need to generate a bill. But he had the patience. He was like, look, we'll get in there and we'll generate a bill for them and we'll fix and we'll do outage notifications and we'll do this and we'll do that and we'll show the ROI. But then eventually now the applications that are being built on it are really, really mind blowing. But that's the hard part is when a lot of people who are visionaries can't have that patience because they want to change the world, which I think what's interesting to me is that I've been around community members who have never been involved in a startup and it's great. And they're very helpful and there's a lot of value they can add. But I think somebody who's been there and done that, and especially someone who's stubbed their toe in ways and like learned lessons the hard way, brings something different that somebody who's never done a startup can do. Can you maybe speak to how helpful your startup experience has been in helping these other entrepreneurs within Ventureprise?
Absolutely. I will say that I think that is probably where I can relate. Devin, who is the director of Ventureprise, so he's done a couple more companies and exit, so he has a bit more experience in that portion of it. So he focuses on, more of the, strategic and business model and those fine details. And I'm more of the communications, the customer discovery, so we sort of balance each other out that way. But where I feel I relate, I tell them, when we're talking about customer discovery, I'm like, listen, I know that this is hard. I fought against it. I kept making questions so they would agree with me. I kept saying, but you're water desperate, like you're water, you need it, and I finally, probably 3 weeks into it, realized, but I can empathize and say, listen, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to prove this, but let's take a step back and let's be open, because what you're going to learn is amazing. If we would have listened a little bit sooner, we probably could have pivoted early, and who knows what would have happened. But it's take in, I know that I don't call it negative feedback, but some people will. Take the feedback that maybe doesn't make you warm and fuzzy at the end of the day, but compile it. And if there are themes in there, that's a little bit of a hint that you may need to make some pivots. I'm not saying that you change on every single thing because everybody's going to have their opinion. You're going to have 1,000 opinions on 1,000 different things on what, but if you're going to start seeing trends, especially with, when you're doing intense customer discovery, but I can really go, listen, I know what it's like to have to listen to that, go, oh my gosh, we've been doing this wrong. We're going to need to pivot a little bit, but we're going to be still on our feet. And I think that that's comforting to people to going, okay, wait, you have done that. Okay. So you're not just telling us that because you've read it in the book. And that's great on other cases as well. But I think be able to relate to them and go, listen, I can tell their feelings. Listen, I know that you have you've been gut punched today. Oh yeah, I have. Like that was a little hard to stomach. I understand. But you know what? We roll with it. I look at that type of feedback as positive, because now you know how to handle it.
Yeah.
Now, the next time you talk to a similar person, you're going to have every answer. And then they're like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. Like we can really get this. And I think it's really about trying to establish those relationships and comfort. Cause I think when people come through ours, like we have a wide range. We have some people that have never really talked to a lot of different people or exposed to Charlotte's startup community. And then we have people that are maybe pivoting and are going through our program as an accountability measure. And, they want to be in the program to learn something new. And so they sort of help out those people, so it's sort of all these different personalities coming together in different stages. And at the core, they're all, struggling in the same ways. But I feel bringing all those together and people understanding that is such an important component of going through this process. So because there's a lot of what we call solopreneurs. A lot of people are starting off doing this on their own. And we know that that's hard. And so hopefully you're meeting people along the lines. I gave one example previously, but that you're meeting people that you can bring on your team, whether it's on contract or somebody refers you to a friend who knows somebody who, and I think that that's where you grow, and being able to hear it from different people that have gone through that process and understand, what we're doing and can give you instances and examples, I think is a benefit.
Absolutely. And what advice do you have for people in the community who haven't done a startup but want to become more involved? I've seen many who are actually very helpful, even though they've never been there.
Oh yeah, I think those are amazing people
Yeah.
that want to help, and we all know that the startup community is in need of that. There's so many different resources. You look at you look at developers who probably a lot of them don't ever start a company. They just like to develop things and hand them off like, oh no, I'll design this. But a lot of people come and are in such need of, messaging and pitching, how do we do this? How do we navigate talking? How do we navigate networking? Networking is very difficult for a lot of different people.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so how do you do? So it's more about bringing those support systems together and talking about what you've done. Hey, I have this graphic design department and I'm able to put together a few things for you, either for cheap or I'll volunteer some time and be on your board or, or advisory board or something of that nature. But I'll tell you, that was the biggest asset to me. And actually how I met Juan Garzon. He was our messaging and story, that person, the pitch.
He's very good at that.
Yes. And he was a CLT Jules advisory board. So that's how we met him. That's how we got introduced to Pitch Breakfast. That's how him and I started working together on other projects. And he started a company, so that's not the best, but it's finding these people though that have these other qualities and that do other things that can just say, hey, yeah, I can help you out. Or, hey, if you want me to review your pitch, I can look for gaps, or where do I understand it? Or I know this developer, I know accounting, little things like that that people don't think of, that where, attorneys, in terms of starting, in terms of writing out where do I need a legal document? Where do I talk about patents? Where, all these, there's just all this influx, and there's such a need, maybe not to be given everything for free, but just a guide on where do I go next? Where do I spend money? If I get, if I win a competition and win $1,000, where should I spend that first? Where should it go? And that, you don't necessarily have had to have started, your own company by, that's just being, part of a group that wants to see other people thrive. And, and I think the startup community is a very big mix of people that just have these really cool companies that can help, social media, graphic design, all these different companies, accounting, but then you have other people that have successfully exited and want to just give back. I think that's a big part of when people, are involved in the startup community. It's a lot of people that want to give back because they knew their struggles. So I think it's a great mix of people, and you just sort of find those people that you connect with, and trust your gut. Like, don't force, like, if you do a couple of emails and you see a couple people and there's, you're not getting any calls back, you need people that want to help you, and you don't want to keep searching. So you're going to find those people that immediately gravitate, return your calls, return your emails, show up at the same type of an event. And those are the people that you're going to be able to rely on as you start to launch this, because it's such a long and difficult process. You have to make sure that it's people you can rely on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, recently, I couldn't remember the exact lineage of how I met the co-founder at Defiance, my business partner here. And I mean, I'd known him for a long time, and through a weird series of connections. And I remembered some of the early people that introduced me to him, but I finally found the very first introduction, and it was a guy named Jake from Bank of America, who has made like 20 great connections for me. And he's one of those. He's never done a startup, but he's just so interested in the community. And I was like, wow. And it's funny, I need to send him a note and thank him for that, because I like, how randomly you'll get something will trigger and you're like, let me see who introduced. Oh, wow, that was Jake that kicked off that entire chain. And I think that's instructive for people who want to get involved in the community. Is if he works at Bank of America and can make a lot of connections, and has been very helpful for me in coaching me on, hey, when you sell to the bank, this is what they're really interested in, because we all want to sell to big companies. So I think for people who want to get involved, if you can help entrepreneurs navigate the network and navigate the procurement in these bigger companies, that's very useful.
Absolutely. No, I think that it's amazing to find those connections, because we have a couple of people that's just what they're known for. They're known as those connectors. And when people come to me and say, hey, I really would love to get involved, I ask basic questions. Okay, great. So where do you think you can make an impact? What skills are you really looking to help with? What type of companies are you looking to get involved with? And do you want to, and I always say no right or wrong answer. Are you looking to just get introduced so you can sell into them? Is this a potential customer? Are you wanting to give discounts? Or are you wanting to volunteer time? No wrong answer on any of those, because that just depends on who I introduce you to in the beginning to get you into that, because there's a lot of people that have the money to pay for things, and they just want to find somebody trustworthy to work with, so there's no right or wrong answer. And you try to just find those commonalities and really go, this is somebody that could really use this. And this is somebody that would be able to benefit from that, and not just do an introduction to do an introduction. And because that's one of the most important things I try to teach a lot of different entrepreneurs coming in is, you're going to not know where to spend your time. And you're going to, at first, you're going to try everything. And you're going to have to learn on your own, but that's not a way to go. I can remember we tried to do everything in the beginning. We were involved in, anytime I saw an event, okay, I'm going to go to it. Okay, I'm signing up to it. And that's all I was doing. And it was wearing me out. And people thought we were cool. We were known as the water people in Charlotte. Oh yeah, the water people, it's so cool. But nobody could relate, and nobody was really going to invest, because Charlotte's landlocked.
Yeah.
Now we went to Wilmington, completely different story. They had had, you know, hurricanes and understood that, and were looking. They were that low hanging fruit, and but it took me a long time to realize we're more of a social cause. So we can't go to these hardcore investors whose first question is, what's my ROI? Because that's their job to know the ROI. We had to find people that said, what's your effect on the planet, and what's your effect on people, planet, then profit. And you just have to learn how to navigate that. Not that there was anything wrong with somebody saying, what's my ROI? Because again, that's the hardcore, you know, what you do when you're investing.
Yeah.
But we had to find the people that was second, that was the second or third in line, because above all, we were making something that was renewable and and scalable and sustainable. And so you finding out where to spend your time and where, because there's a lot of different, I deal with a lot of different projects. Some are heavily research based. That takes a whole different entirety of people that they're going to talk to and relate to. And then there's some people that just have this really cool innovation that it's very understandable, is ready for market, and there you go. So it's finding those crowds, and a lot of times they come together in some instance, but spending your time where that there's connections to be made, and that's when they're looking for what you're selling, is sort of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered most of the things I wanted to talk about. There is one more thing I'd like to cover before I let you get back to your day. I just want to, and you hinted at it about the females in STEM programs. I'd like to talk about women in tech, women in startups, women raising venture capital and angel funding. What has your experience been here, or what would your commentary be on in general the challenges that maybe women face that are unique in all of these?
So I came from a radio background into entrepreneurship. So it's two fields where there's not a lot of, there's still work to be done.
It's underrepresented.
Yes. Yes. And I have been very fortunate. I will say I am one of the most fortunate. I have found, both in radio and in this other career, where I've had my superiors support me and and challenge me and say, yes, you need to grow, and and listen to me, and identified when because there's plenty of times, even still today, we're in conversations, and there's a couple of males that I work with very regularly, and we'll be in meetings, one or the other, and I'm very fortunate that both of them will say, because there's plenty of times where the questions are directed to them every single time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just this person sitting there. Are you taking notes? Or, and I'm very fortunate where both of those gentlemen will say, actually, that's Laura's, that's Laura's expertise. So you may want to ask.
I'm laughing because Tarek and I have this happen all the time with Defiance. Everybody wants to ask us questions, and we're like, no, you need to talk to Ashley, our CFO, because if she isn't involved, it doesn't get done.
Yes. And that's, but I'm very fortunate, and Ashley's very fortunate, like that. I've realized that doesn't really happen a lot. And so there's room for improvement. There will always be room for improvement. And, we think of some of the resources. A lot of people have initiatives, which I'm very excited about. Not, COVID coming through, and then, everything else this past couple of years have made people really understand. So, Collective Hustle, has some of that. And then Jocelyn with Florex, which is the women in tech. So there's a lot of focus. And I say what we need to do is pull from those resources and really give them notice and look at what they're doing. NC Idea has all these new initiatives, and they're funding different programs. And actually our new ecosystem grant with them, we've been a NC Idea ecosystem partner this is our third round with them. And our new one is actually one I'm really excited about, but it's basically it's going to be a commercialization leadership program. And what we're going to do is, the goal is to get women and other underrepresented minorities in leadership positions. So we're going to have this training program, and we're going to actually have them go out. And so if you look at a lot of different panels, a lot of different mentoring programs, a lot of different, grant reviewers and pitch competitions, you don't see a lot of females and underrepresented on those panels. or on those judges. And for a female pitching to an all male, that's sometimes there's a disconnect there. And so doing something like this and getting more people empowered to be able to go out and hold these leadership positions in the Charlotte community is something that we're really looking forward to. So that's one of our new programs through NC Ideas Ecosystem Grant. And then what we're doing on campus is we're going to work with more underrepresented faculty members on implementing entrepreneurial programming across campus. So it's sort of empowering different underrepresented minorities with these interesting talents that they have, and actually recognizing them and saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. And now you're going to be able to do what you need to do out in the community or on campus. And I feel like we need to give more attention to those. And when you're looking, to fill a judging panel, when you're looking to do mentors for a program, go to these programs, go to these different, organizations and say, hey, listen, I saw where you're doing this. I would love to be able to get involved and have a couple of your participants sit in on this panel. And it's really being forward thinking and doing that and saying, okay, I know that this is what's happening. One of the things I'm very proud about is our Charlotte community is starting to work really well together. I talk with so many different organizations regularly. Hey, what are you doing? What do you have on the table? What's coming up? How can I help? And people do that with me. And I think Charlotte's growing in that sense, and there's not so much competition. I don't really know what it was like previously, but I see where people are fine-tuning their own programs, and so they're becoming the experts. And so we have all these different, you have Innovate Charlotte that's experts in mentoring programs and, has the MIT mentoring program. You have Ventureprise who's doing, the customer discovery. You have SBTDC who's working on the technology grant. So you have all these different RevTech Labs, FinTech, Queen City, FinTech, all. So you have these different organizations. So go to them with their expertise and notice them for their expertise, but then also notice where they're trying to make a difference in using underrepresented minorities for leadership positions, for participants and things like that, like really making a forward motion to do that.
That's great advice for sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll probably email you after the show just to get a rundown of the different resources that you found useful, and we'll link to those in the show notes.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many that I wrote down a few, and I know that I have another list, but it's, but I'm very respectful of what people have done so far in Charlotte. And I think a very important thing is in the next step is really understanding how everybody can be interconnected and complement each other and use resources. So if there's a certain grant, and that's where you come into, that's where I try to get the university recognized. One of the big things that we're trying to do is, go to R1 status, and that's going to take 5 to 10 years. But so there's a big focus on research. So understand, look to see what the university is doing and seeing what research is, because the connections can be really invaluable on that. But then also, look at what's coming out of RevTech Labs, and look at what's coming, what is Collective Hustle doing? Jocelyn, Florex is, I think they're doing in fall of this coming fall, they'll have their big conference. So it's really embracing those, but realizing where they're experts, and then saying, okay, like this is what you really do well. So I'm going to get some advice from you. And I think that working together and having those lines of communication is very important. And we're all starting to do that and recognize each other, I think.
Absolutely. Well, look, this has been great, Laura. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for everything that Ventureprise is doing. It really is a great resource for the community.
And I will do one plug. We are currently have open applications.
Awesome. And where can people apply for that? I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Entrepreneurship.uncc.edu.
.uncc.edu.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. We'll make sure that we get that link in there. Well, thanks so much, Laura. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was great. Enjoyed it.
Take care. Bye-bye.